Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome again to the Challenger Network News. I'm Brandon Bichler, and very happy to host you today. Today, we're going to be talking about mobility and some of the changes that have been happening pre the COVID pandemic, during the COVID pandemic, and what that might mean for urban mobility going towards the future. Has the pandemic accelerated the transformation of urban mobility, or has it simply shifted transportation needs away from city centers? What does this mean for mobility companies, to real estate, hospitality sector, who have strong urban footprints? So we're going to explore these themes today. I'm very happy to welcome Evangelos Simoudis. Evangelos, how are you doing today?
Very well. Good to be with you, Brandon, and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So Evangelos is a Silicon Valley-based investor, advisor, and author of two books that are really relevant to what we'll be talking about today. Your first book was The Big Data Opportunity in Our Driverless Future, if I understand. And the most recent one is Transportation Transformation. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about that?
So I wrote the first book, frankly, because I came to realize that big data is going to play a significant, maybe a central role to new mobility. And in fact, big data and AI will become the glue to new mobility. The second book takes a broader view and examines how automakers, the services companies, and metropolitan areas, urban centers, need to transform before they can collaborate in order to achieve the goals of new mobility. And collaboration will be important. I mean, that's one of the theses of the book. But also because of where each of these constituencies stand today, they need to transform so that they can enable that collaboration.
Absolutely. And this is not a small undertaking because of all the parties involved, the fact that we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about behavior that's deeply rooted. There's just so many moving parts for this. So
investment that will be necessary. I mean, you look at even the recent US stimulus plan and how much it devotes to transportation. It's still, I mean, the numbers are staggering, and it's still more that is needed.
Absolutely. First of all, I do want to, as we're talking here today, as always, I want to remind everyone, if you have a question, give us a comment, and we'll pick up your question and try to answer it along the way. But Evangelos, why don't we start out before we talk about the impact of the pandemic, why don't we start off of what were some of the forces that we're seeing? What was happening? What were the key trends prior to the pandemic when it came to mobility? If you could just kind of help us paint a picture and help our audience understand kind of what was happening, where were things going? And then maybe we can talk about, okay, and then when the pandemic hit, what was the impact? And then we can maybe look a little bit forward towards what do we anticipate the post-pandemic, whatever that means and whatever that timeline is for how things are going to look after that. Do you want to start with setting the scene kind of prior to last March 2020?
So first of all, I should say that when I talk about mobility, I refer to both passenger transportation and goods delivery. So they're all part of what moves particularly in an urban environment. Now, pre-pandemic, you have to remember that pretty much around the world, we had significant growing economies. We had ample capital, which allowed a lot of investment in new concepts, be it autonomous vehicles, be it mobility services. And what we've had during that period, we had a development, I think, of silos, right? The automakers, with all the new ideas and the new investments had built around the silo that they had. Mobility services companies, which saw a significant growth during the 5-6 years prior to the pandemic, continue to see increasing adoption around the world, particularly around ride-hailing and micro-mobility. And then public transportation actually saw significant growth too, as more people were moving to urban centers. Obviously, all that changed during the pandemic, and to me, the big gainer during the pandemic is the goods delivery. The public learned that they don't have to go to pick up something, that something will come to them, right? So you saw an increasing use of services, whether it is for grocery delivery, for food delivery, prepared foods, or other type of packages and goods. I think a lot of that will remain post-pandemic, because again, there is a convenience that people saw, and as they try to look at building more work environments around their home, they saw that this is a convenience that can remain post-pandemic. Now, it's very difficult to make predictions about what our life is going to be post-pandemic with regards to transportation. But as we are seeing now from a variety of surveys, and even some of the work that more recently that I started doing around telework, there is a broadening desire of people to adopt telework, maybe not 100% of the time, but certainly more than they did before. And I think one of the surveys that you also conducted showed some of that.
Absolutely. And in fact, we've just had that question come in from Gareth, who's asking, with more than ever people working from home, do we think people will return to commuting to their offices, or will industries adopt a permanent mixture of working from home and in the office? And how will this impact transportation? As you mentioned, we ran a survey knowing that we were going to do this topic this week, just asking more the voice of the commuter, not the voice of the employer, but the voice of the commuter. How many days a week would you like to commute when restrictions lift? And it was pretty interesting. So a very small percentage of people said they would not like to commute at all, and a very small percentage of people said they would like to commute 5 days a week. The majority of answers were between 1 and 4 days, with 52% saying they see themselves commuting 1 to 2 days per week, and 32% of people saying they would commute 3 to 4 days. So using that as a proxy for what that new the new environment might look like, what is the impact of transportation? What do you think? Let's talk about not the delivery side of things, like we talked about transportation delivery. Let's talk about carrying humans, that side, to city centers.
So public transportation has been a big loser during this period, and at least the immediate post-pandemic outlook is not particularly rosy for public transportation. But that also depends on geography. And again, I've been stressing in the book that new urban mobility is not going to have global trends. It's going to have regional trends. So here in the United States, for example, there has been a significant move out of the city center, whereas before we were seeing a lot, particularly younger generations, moving into the city center. So there's demand for larger houses. There is also a move outside of certain urban environments. There is well-publicized moves out of New York City, out of San Francisco, to lower cost cities. I think that will also have an impact on public transportation and on transportation in general. It will depend, for example, how many of these people who moved outside of these cities during the pandemic decide to return. But I think in general, cities are starting to realize that there needs to be a collaboration that is centered around private-public partnerships. And in order to even make up for the fall in the ridership of public transportation modalities, you will see this combination of on-demand mobility services for passenger mobility with the fixed routing of public transportation. So I see that is definitely becoming a trend. But we'll see it expressed differently in Asia. I mean, we're working with a number of OEMs and mobility services companies in Asia than it is going to be expressed in Europe or in the United States. So I think we need to be prepared for that regional expression as opposed to looking for global trends.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I am aware of kind of pre-pandemic is how you talked about private and public coming together, and it seemed to be like a heterogeneous journey. We've seen actually some good examples where I live in London of companies like Citymapper partnering with Transport for London to actually provide alternative, well, let's say the fastest point from A to B to get you with lots of different options across the city. Whether it's you start with a bike, you get on a train, you get an Uber on the other side, and it's and it's all done via an app, which you can plan that whole journey.
Yeah, I think I believe that the new mobility will evolve in a number of phases. We're now moving into a phase of this initial operation between on-demand mobility services and public transportation networks. You see it even in the US. There's a lot, whereas pre-pandemic, the relationship tended to be more antagonistic. Now it is much more collaborative. The OEMs have not come in yet to that collaboration. I think that will come towards the latter part of this decade, at which point first of all, the mobility as a service, the transportation as a service will become much more of a reality than it is today. And in all of that, you mentioned applications such as Citymapper. I think these are important. I mean, journey planners, as they're called, are important applications, and they will become even more important going forward. I mean, you saw the acquisition of MoveIt by Mobileye. I think that's a significant indication of what we can be looking forward to. But in all of this, I think you will see the increasing role of AI and intelligent capabilities into these applications and into transportation in general. And my firm has been investing very aggressively around what we believe the role of AI will be in mobility over the next 10 years.
Right. So one thing that's kind of been on my mind is, cities have gone through multiple cycles. I grew up in the US, where city centers became decimated because it was easy to move outside, land was cheap. Like you said, we talked about, people moving outside of cities. And then you saw the opposite start to happen is people wanted to be back in the city because they realized they were missing on something that was cultural, that human energy. And there was a move back to cities, which we definitely saw over the last decade or so. Clearly, I agree with you. The surveys we've done and studies we've done have shown that people are certainly, maybe people who are a little bit later in age have decided, well, I don't have to commute 5 days a week, so I can live further outside the city. I can live in a country home, maybe further away, and I'll go in 1 or 2 days a week. But hasn't the pandemic also made us just ready to have human interaction, to experience the arts, to experience a restaurant, to get back together, as it were? Do you think that will play a role?
Absolutely. That's why I'm saying it is very difficult to make predictions about the long-term future as the post-pandemic long-term future. We know, again, whether it is US, whether it is Europe, that people are getting tired of the sequestration that the pandemic has imposed on us. And I think you will see, I would call it an explosion of travel, whether it is road trips, whether it is trips that involve airline travel immediately post-pandemic. You also see companies taking different approaches to this. I mean, so for example, Amazon and Facebook here in the US are leasing large real estate in New York. And whereas a lot of companies are leaving Manhattan, they are actually taking on more space. We have other companies here in Silicon Valley, Salesforce, Twitter, and others that are accepting their employees working remotely over long periods of time and only coming back to a central location occasionally. And some of them are even saying that they're not even going to change the benefits of these employees and make it kind of like align them with the cost of living of the areas where they decide to reside long term. You have countries that are trying to attract digital nomads, as they are called. I think again, as I said, there is a lot of activity right now. How much of that is going to become a long-term trend, and how much is going to become much more of a short-lived activity? I think we'll have to wait a little bit longer. There's no question that the vehicle automation that is coming down the line, whether it is robo-taxis or other forms of autonomous vehicles that we expect over the next 5 to 10 years to become a reality globally, they will be a significant contributor to long-term trends, but we don't see that yet.
Absolutely, and it's just a lesson, like any lesson, is we don't exactly know what the future is going to hold. So we're going to need to experiment and try things, and certainly be willing to adjust and adapt as things do change. Because I agree with you. I think going out and saying, okay, from now on, nobody will need to work from the office, we might see counter reactions to that. We might find that people don't want to do that. So I think it's about being flexible and ready to adapt.
But I'm sorry, I will note the one thing is that we are seeing some very interesting and important moves by cities. So particularly in Europe, you see cities now starting to aggressively allocate space for micromobility, scooters and bikes, also for pedestrians. There is a lot more discussion about how you reconfigure cities and what kind of services you bring into the suburb in order to decrease the need to always go to the city center. You also have cities that are starting to rethink that hub and spoke model of that dominated public transportation design, both the routing and the actual infrastructure over the past several decades. So to me, all of these are very positive moves. And even if not all of them get implemented, the fact that we're starting to think about them and talk about them and collaborate around them are important parts of this transformation that I have been discussing in the book.
Absolutely. And that's going to be all the time we have for us to talk about this today. But I do encourage everyone who's watching this to check out Evangelos' book, Transportation Transformation, as well. You do a regular blog on teleworking and many other topics. So I encourage everyone to check that out. And if those of you who are with us live want to continue the conversation, we'll do so on your channel of choice in the comments. So we look forward to engaging with you there as well. Evangelos, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. I hope you have a great weekend, and happy weekend to everyone. And we'll see you next week on Challenger Network News.
Thank you.